Hi everyone, it's Mr. Cinti, and today I have the pleasure of discussing with you the concept of extinction. That's right, as the title might imply, extinction is forever. It's kind of cruel, but this is the way it is. You know, it's one of those, it's too late to apologize. So no matter how long you've been living on the earth, there's no guarantees. Like for example, Mr. T. Rex right here, Tyrannosaurus Rex. A representative of the dinosaurs, and there are many different species. So they've been on the earth, we believe, from around 230 million years to 65 million years ago, and they're not with us today. It's certainly in the numbers that they existed before. And then, you know, when you consider modern human, we've only been around for about 200,000 years, and so out of East Africa. So it begs the question, what causes mass extinction, and what are some of the outcomes of it? And I think hopefully this will be an interesting conversation. And so the fossil record is substantial, but it's incomplete. And it's a good chronicle of life's history, but it's really dependent on, you know, a sequence of events that constructs fossils that are somewhat improbable when you think about it. You know, the organism has to die in the right place. It has to be buried in the sediment in order to be preserved. The rock layer has to, you know, escape the process of being destroyed itself that it's embedded in, and it also, when the fossil is exposed, that rock could be eroded. And then, you know, there's the slim chance that someone's even going to find the fossil before it's actually destroyed or eroded itself. And so a substantial number of species, this is important, that live probably left no fossils at all. And so most of the fossils that have been formed have probably been destroyed for a variety of reasons. And so in general, the fossils that we have in museums and in universities are totally slanted towards the organisms that have lived a long time. So they've left many fossils that were abundant, widespread, and were mainly composed of hard parts like shells and skeletons. And so, however, that being said, that the fossil strata does record many interesting examples of biological and environmental change. So one of the things that I want to kick around in the beginning of this is that phylogeny, the life history of organisms and how they're related to one another, has an emphasis in biogeography. And so what does this mean? So the history of the physical Earth explains a lot about biological evolution and life's history on the Earth. So the Earth is pretty much in the driver's seat, controlling changes that will manifest in the creation of new species or the disappearance of species on the Earth. So it's physical, and I'd say it's somewhat random, if you will, some of these events. And so, for example, an emergence of the volcanic islands and the archipelago just west of South America, the Galapagos Islands. When these islands formed in the Pacific Ocean, it opened up new environments for the founders of those islands to reach those outputs. And I jump ahead here to one of the more famous inhabitants of the Galapagos Islands, which are the giant tortoise. And so how did these tortoise get from the mainland to these islands? We believe that they were just holding on for dear life on vegetation to get across. About 1,500 kilometers, I believe, are the Galapagos Islands west of Ecuador. And so, as it turns out, once you reach these sort of islands, it's a great opportunity for adaptive radiation. In other words, generation of new species because of the available new niches that are on those environments, and so new species can arise as a result of that, as indicated by. And so, you know, what kind of different environmental conditions would result in different species of tortoise? Well, one quick example that's pretty easy to understand, that on the relatively dry islands, those tortoises that have like a longer neck and sort of this notch in the back of their shell allows them to stretch up to reach the foliage on cactus plants that grow on the island. And so you'll find on the drier islands saddleback tortoises as opposed to the intermediate and domed ones. And so there's many examples of how environmental conditions will vary from one geography to the other. When these inland lakes, for example, that comprise about 40 different species of stickleback, which are very famous, stickle because they have these dorsal fins back here. The ones that are ocean going are highly armored, and they have these dorsal fins that predators, big fish that come and try to eat them, get a mouthful of spines right here, and they're protected by the armor. But in some of these inland freshwater lakes, this is actually a disadvantage. And so this is actually a disadvantage to be having these pokey dorsal fins. And so there's a dragonfly larva that likes to hook onto them. And so there's a natural selection favoring those with less armor, fast swimming, and reduced dorsal fins. And so the geography is affecting the phylogeny. Now, those are small examples compared to what I'm about to talk about. So about 250, you might be familiar with this, 250 million years ago, all the land masses on the Earth were joined together. This is kind of cool. This is sort of a state-by-state rendition of this, into one supercontinent called Pangaea. And that had a tremendous impact on the life history of the planet Earth. There's no question about that. And so this supercontinent existed during the late Paleozoic and early Mesozoic eras. Okay, so right at that transition point between Paleozoic and Mesozoic. And so it formed about 300 million years ago, and then it began to break apart 150 million years ago. And so both its creation and its breakup totally affected the life on the Earth and all the life after that. And so species that have evolved in isolation, in other words, when the land masses were apart from one another, had to now compete with organisms that when Pangaea was formed. And so also the total amount of shoreline was reduced as a result of the formation of this supercontinent right here, when there was a lot more surface area, but when it's all in one, there's less surface area, so less shoreline. And also inland seas, shallow inland seas were drained as a result of this over time. So the interior of the continent of Pangaea became drier and drier, and the weather was more severe, and so this had an impact on the life at this time. So the formation of Pangaea surely had a tremendous impact, and it reshaped the biological diversity by causing extinction. Now, extinction, again, is the complete disappearance of a species on the planet Earth. But as a result, that provides new opportunities for taxonomic groups that do survive. So this is an important theme, though it's sort of sad to lose some species, but then that it's opportunity for new ones to come. It's sort of like erasing a whiteboard in the classroom. It's it's sad to see that go, but then it offers opportunity for new information to come into play. So, if you will, the second major shock to the Earth was 150 million years ago, when the Pangaea decided to break up into separate continents. As you can see, it's starting to occur right in this area. And so the coming together and the breakup were major events in life's history. And so this is where we see the continents today that are separated due to continental drift. So on a global scale, this continental drift is a major geographic factor that correlates with the spatial distribution of life, extinctions of life, and adaptive radiations of life. So I hope you come away from this video understanding that the geological events of continental drift, in other words, the formation of Pangaea, the separation of Pangaea, have basically resulted in major mass extinction and adaptive radiation of life on this planet Earth. And again, if you're not familiar with continental drift, this is certainly not the video to totally explain it, but it's basically the plates of the Earth, the crust, like cruising along, floating on the hot mantle below that in the Earth. And so you can see where these plates come together, where there's formation between the Pacific plate and the North American plate. Where these things rub together are the faults, where you see lots of earthquakes. So paleontologists, these are specialists that are looking at fossils and looking at evolutionary phylogeny. They've discovered matching fossils. I find this to be particularly interesting. They found matching fossils of Triassic reptiles in West Africa, so right over here in West Africa, and also in East South America in Brazil, that were continuous during the Mesozoic era. Here's an example of such a fossil. And so what does this mean? That means that once these continents have drifted, so of course South America is separated by the Atlantic Ocean now, so it's a big separation. But can you imagine paleontologists finding fossils located here in Brazil and also here in West Africa that are extremely similar, suggestive of the fact that this was once these animals once had a common range when the continent was together in Pangaea. So pretty cool. So the life history on this Earth is punctuated by mass extinction. So in other words, life is going along, relatively quiet, quiescent periods. There's creation of new species, There's disappearance of some species. It's moving along, and then boom, a major mass extinction occurs, which is a tremendous loss in species. So when those events occur, and there's been 5 major mass extinctions in life's history, we believe that we're in the midst of a 6th mass extinction. More of that in a moment. But once there's a mass extinction, that's usually followed, and here's a theme, by extensive diversification of some groups that escape the extinction. So in other words, that provides opportunity now that there's a lot more niches available on the Earth. And so why does a species become extinct? Well, that's a big question. But a couple of reasons that we believe that extinction occurs is that there's a major habitat loss. There's a major destruction in the habitat. Like, for example, on a local level, a tremendous event might be like a volcano, for example. Here's a picture in Washington of Mount St. Helens eruption. Major habitat loss. Or it could be something major environmental change in an unfavorable direction, like a major climate change such as drought. Could cause extinction to occur for some organisms that are not ready for it. And it also because maybe there's some other species in the community, because there's interaction between organisms, community. What are those? Competition, predation, symbiosis. Maybe there's a new organism in the area that seems to be targeting certain species for the worst. So a big bad predator coming in and chewing up a lot of organisms. Like, for example, here in the ocean, in the Cambrian era at this time. And so a more detailed example of this is like perhaps during the evolution of some Cambrian animals, maybe such things as jaws and shells made it difficult for organisms to crack those. But it made other organisms more vulnerable to predation that did not have hard parts. And so therefore, these predators would pick on organisms having like softer parts. And so, this is the way that is. And so extinction, here's another come away message. It's inevitable when you consider that it's been repetitive on Earth's history. When I say it's inevitable in a changing world. So the Earth is subject to geological changes that periodically could mean a long period of time, but there's going to be periodic change, and that's going to dramatically affect the life history on the planet Earth. So geological change. However, that being said, is that I have to emphasize this, that the previous 5 mass extinctions were the result of geological events, like the ones that I've discussed so far. But we believe strongly that this 6th mass extinction that we're in today is not being necessarily caused by climate but moreover by one species in particular, and you might have guessed it, and it's us, humanity. And so we've had a tremendous effect on the habitat of other organisms. We've introduced non-native species into area which can be devastated. We're capable of polluting areas, and so we're also capable of destruction of particular species. And this is the beloved coastal redwood tree of California. And humans have come in and basically in the last 150 years decimated 95% of this species. And so somewhat tragic, but I'll say this, that if we can understand our way and understand the mistakes that we've made, perhaps there's hope for change. And unless we do something about it, extinction will continue to go. But there's sort of that, you know, from the book, the Lorax, unless we can make a change. And so keep hope alive. So during these crises of history, global conditions change so rapidly, geological climate, that it's really basically disruptive, and the majority of species that have ever lived on this earth have already been swept away. And so it's hard to imagine that, but the fossil record supports this, that there's been 5 major mass extinctions, and the 6th one could possibly be happening currently. And so we know these things have occurred in the past. And so one of the mass extinctions that I want to emphasize is this Permian mass extinction about 250 million years ago. So are you ready for this? Like, let me go back. Do you see this right in here? The Permian extinction right here. It's basically the line between the Paleozoic and Mesozoic areas right in there. So look how many species were destroyed. And so we're talking about 96, ready? 96, let me write it out. 96% of all living things went extinct during this time in a fairly short period of time. And so 90% of all marine organisms and went extinct. And so it's basically the boundary, as I mentioned before, between the Paleozoic and Mesozoic eras. It also impacted land organisms, as you'd imagine. 8 of 27 orders of insects didn't survive into the next period. And then the mass extinction occurred, and this is just like a blink of the eye, in less than 5 million years. So I wonder what could have caused such a thing. Well, perhaps you might have guessed it, but I'll just say this, that before we get into that, all life on the planet Earth today is descended from those 4% that lived and survived that Permian mass extinction. Pretty crazy. So what are some factors that could have caused that Permian extinction, mass extinction? Well, perhaps there was a disturbance to the marine and terrestrial habitats due to the formation of the Pangaea, the supercontinent. That could have possibly been a causal agent. And then if you notice over here in the Siberian area, there's evidence of massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia that perhaps released so much carbon dioxide right in here into the air. CO2 levels rising tremendously. This kind of sounds like today a little bit. Possibly that warmed the global climate. And that could have then, in turn, changed the ocean's circulation to reduce the amount of oxygen available to marine organisms, which would be devastating as well. And so another mass extinction, the Cretaceous mass extinction, I say just, 65 million years ago, doomed a lot of marine species as well, but most famously nearly destroyed all of the dinosaur lineages. And so that's when the dinosaurs perished. And so that is also defines the boundary between Mesozoic and Cenozoic eras. If I go back over here, I can show you that right here. So this is that KT boundary 65 million years ago. And so what could claim such a devastating loss to the dinosaurs? And again, the dinosaurs were ruling the earth for 150 million years, and then suddenly they all perish very briefly. Well, this is one indication that there was a major meteor strike. And so there's a few hypotheses about this particular mass extinction. The climate became much cooler, and again, the dinosaurs being cold-blooded, were vulnerable to this kind of coldness. Large volcanic eruptions, India may have again released a tremendous amount of greenhouse gases. But maybe one of the most leading hypotheses were produced by Walter and Luis Alvarez, and they thought that a great meteor impacted the Earth, and that created a massive collision, great cloud. The world would have been blocked with sunlight for several months at least, major climate change. And so what evidence do we have for this major meteor collision on the Earth? Well, we know that there's a thin layer of clay that has this element iridium, and this element iridium is very rare on Earth, but it's kind of common in meteors. And so there's a tremendous amount of this chemical iridium right at that border 65 million years ago, and it's consistent really throughout the world. And so the ash contained is about 30 times the normal amount, so there must have been major fires resulting. And again, high concentration of iridium. There was molten glass particles, and so a lot of collateral circumstantial evidence supporting this meteor strike. And so we were like, okay, so there's a lot of evidence, like but where is the actual crater? If this was such a major impact, there should be a massive crater suggesting this. And so it remained unfound for decades until I believe satellites orbiting the Earth detected this in the Yucatan Peninsula and off the coast of Mexico, that had been buried beneath sediments. That this major crater was found right over here in the Yucatan Peninsula, suggestive of the fact that the major meteor hit 65 million years ago. And then here again, there's satellite imaging of this massive crater, which suggests that it was so huge that it possibly, again, like I said before, darkened the Earth for months, maybe years, reducing photosynthesis, and which then shuts off a lot of food to life on the planet Earth. And so the shape of the crater sort of implies that North America would have been hit more severe, and we have examples of that, and less severe in the rest of the world, and we have examples of this as well. And so finally, I want to say that while the emphasis of mass extinction is the loss of species, as I was been saying, there's also the flip side of it. With the loss becomes tremendous opportunity for those who do survive. And so it might be, the survival might be something due to adaptive quality, like for example, these very small burrowing mammals that seemed pretty insignificant 65 million years ago. When the climate changed and there wasn't a lot of food around and it got real cold, maybe they were able to survive. Or maybe it was just sheer luck. But what's remarkable is that we're descendant from those organisms. And so maybe our existence on the Earth itself is the result of just the random strike of the planet Earth by a meteor 65 million years ago that created opportunities. And so extinction may be forever, but those who survive, I think, benefit as a result. So hopefully this was interesting and useful and educational. Thanks for watching.